Hello, everyone. Welcome to Nugentino Cinema. And today I'm here again with Kay. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm pretty good. So today we're here to review Gummo, which is a Harmony Korine film from 1997. And this is one of my favorite films of all time. Just to start with, have you ever seen a Harmony Korine film before?
Only Spring Breakers, and it's been a few years since I've seen it.
hmm What were your thoughts on that one?
On Spring Breakers, I actually really liked it. I feel like it was kind of not very well received when it first came out, at least in my peer group. But it really grew on me. I guess I've seen it a couple times because I saw it when it first came out, and then I watched it again. And on a rewatch, I was like, "This is a." I think I have it as a 5-star movie. If not, it's at least a 4. But I really liked it. I thought it was very different and refreshing, and I liked like the attitude and the way that it was shot. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I've been wanting to watch more of Harmony Korine's filmography, but I just haven't got around to it until today.
yeah. Yeah, I'm glad I could introduce you to this film, as crazy as a film as it is. Um, it's pretty. I mean, I don't know. Something I've been thinking about is that, and I don't know that I was ever consciously thinking this when I was younger, but I feel like I was attracted to shocking subject matter for whatever reason. I don't know why. I mean, it's just looking back, like I love Boogie Nights. I love Gummo. I'm trying to think of others like Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer. Maybe it's like people like horror movies and they want like kind of like a thrill ride or something like that. I don't know. But that's not the only reason I love the movie, obviously. I've seen it. I was looking at like my log of it. I've seen it 7 times now. This was the seventh time
Oh
since
wow.
I've been on Letterboxd. I think maybe I saw it once before that, but yeah, it's hard to explain like why I love it. Part of it is just being kind of immersed into this culture, this strange culture that you never would see on film, and part of it is some like, and this watch and the last watch, like maybe that was like a year ago. I was thinking the most about like how strange it is that this movie is basically a documentary. Like you see films that are touted, like there's one called American Animals where they like talk about a real story and they're interviewing real subjects, but they like cut to like fictional reenactments with like actual actors, and so it's like a documentary fiction hybrid. And that's kind of what I let's see this as, because so many people in the movie are just found people. Harmony Korine was roaming the streets, just picking people up, asking them to be in his movie. But then he takes that and he intersplices in a very loose narrative. But so I find that really interesting. But those are some of my initial reasons for liking the film. But what were your initial thoughts on it?
Yeah, so I kind of liked it from go because it very much fits the kind of feel and aesthetic and gosh, I'm spacing on the word, but it speaks to a lot of like my taste, I suppose, and what I tend to be attracted to in films. And I liked that it was very kind of abrasive, and it caught my interest and my attention right away, which not a lot of
Yeah,
films do. And then it held it, and that's like, not a lot of films can do that either. So I just
yeah,
found that I was really invested and really interested in seeing what he wanted to do with the movie, because it started from such kind of an off kilter, dark place. And I wasn't really sure what to expect from watching the film. I'd heard people talk about it before as something that, is extremely memorable, not always in a good way, and that can be like a bit taxing to watch. So I wasn't sure what I was going to get, and the fact that I got something that was so appealing to me, even though it handles so many dark things, I think just speaks to like what a good film it is. So yeah, I found that first and foremost the aesthetic element of it appealed to me, but yeah, the kind of just wandering, meandering sort of feeling to it while still having that loose narrative also spoke to me. I was thinking a few times throughout the film actually about like slacker and hangout movies, especially with the moments in Gummo where they're like driving around in a car and having those kinds of conversations. And since this came out after that, it made me wonder almost if he was influenced by those sorts of movies. So I think like there's that element and like that mood or like a way of approaching the story that also spoke to me. So those are just kind of like some loose things before really getting into like the details of what I enjoyed about the film. But in broad strokes, that's what appealed to me. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I can see him maybe being influenced by Linklater, a little bit, but I think, like, the person I hear him most compared to is Werner Herzog, and I can see a lot of Werner Herzog in his work. And Werner Herzog has been like, he acted in Julian Donkey Boy, which is another Harmony Korine film, and he also acted in Mr. Lonely. And I know their friendship, quote unquote, started here because Harmony Korine released Gummo, and apparently Werner Herzog called him up and he said, like, when I saw the scene of the kid in the bathtub with the bacon strapped to the wall, like, I knew you were one of the last soldiers of cinema. And so
Yeah, I
apparently he thought it was amazing. Yeah.
yeah, well, I didn't know about that connection. That's really interesting. I can kind of see some of that. I think if I had known that before watching the film, I maybe would have been looking for more uh, kind of tie-ins or nods. But yeah, that's really interesting because I kind of saw it as like um, a hangout coming of age sort of movie, but what makes it unique and so interesting is that it's kind of like flips it on its head, and rather than it being this sort of like sentimental, nostalgic kind of like childhood movie, it's very much the opposite, and it's very like dark and like traumatic, and it has like a lot of
Yeah.
these elements, but it uses the structure of like a coming of age movie. And so I thought that was really interesting too.
It's interesting that you refer to it as coming of age movie because I've never really thought of it like that, but I can definitely see it. One thought that I was having is that the main kid who him and his other friend like go around shooting cats. That's their job. But the kid who sits in the, I forget what his name is in the movie, but like the main kid that's on the cover and he like, sits in the bathtub, like he's kind of surrounded by this like dark world, and his friend is, pretty despicable, and there's a lot of things that they're doing are just that are despicable, but like I could see like a beauty in him, like in certain scenes, like it felt like he was this kernel of goodness in an otherwise fucked up world, and it just made me think about. I feel like that's a lot of what Harmony Korine's going for. He's trying to show things that are like just really fucked up, but he's trying to like find like little kernels of beauty here and there throughout that. So I think that's what I get out of it at least.
Yeah, and I can definitely see that. I think maybe not necessarily coming of age, but it feels like you're watching different people actively adapting to their culture and their circumstances. And I think it's interesting that you have like the way it's approached is really interesting too, because gosh, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. But like the way that he shows the young men as compared to the young women, and like their kind of different groups and how they spend their day and what they do and what their concerns are and fears and all these things, their traumas, their goals. And so you kind of see him over the course of the film, like going further and further down this path of his circumstances. Like it starts off with, we are introduced to them as killing cats to make money, but then like later, they like break into someone's house, I think, and so it just kind of like escalates, and then at the end he's like holding the dead cat, and so it just feels like yeah, maybe not necessarily coming of age, but just like watching somebody sink into their circumstances to a point where like they're unlikely to have that turnaround, and you see that in like multiple characters in the film.
Yeah, for sure. It took me a few viewings to fully understand everything that was going on at the ending, or like because of the ending, I feel like he tries to like because there's a lot of like for the first little while, there's just a lot of random stuff happening, but there is like a some sort of a thread, um, and I feel like it's hard to follow at certain points because you're so focused on the randomness.
Mm-hmm.
But the only thing I like because I know like the Chloe Savini and her sister, their cat like, goes missing. They're looking for the cat, and then I didn't realize until like a few viewings ago, maybe I don't know exactly when, but like after I'd seen it a couple times, But I didn't realize until for a while that the kid or that the cat that the bunny boy is like holding is their cat, like their cat that was lost. And just like their dead cat, which is messed up. But and then you have that bunny boy like cross over with him or with the girls at the end, and then you have like, and so when they break into that guy's house, it's like their rival that is like, encroaching on their cat killing territory or whatever. So I thought it was interesting that he tried to have like a little tiny plot, but for the most part, it is, you know, just exploring weird facets of this culture and, random interviews with like, an albino person and things like that. But one thing I thought, like, because I was saying at the beginning of this review that I feel like when I was younger, I was attracted to like messed up movies. But I feel like the more than that, I feel like the overlying thing that connects like all those movies that I like is I usually like there to be some sort of a sense of humor, like a strange sense of humor. And Harmony Korine's like absurd sense of humor, like I really respond to. Like in all my favorite movies, there's usually like an absurd sense of humor in some form. And things like him, like the guys like wrestling with the chair and just weird stuff like that is awesome. But yeah.
Yeah, and I'm kind of curious about what you think about the cats throughout the film too, because I was trying to piece that together throughout the film because it seemed to be this very persistent idea. Like there's cats throughout the entire thing, and I understand it's like part of their profession, and that like maybe the idea is that there's all these stray cats, and so they're collecting the cats and kill the cats and sell them to the
Mhm.
Chinese food place or whatever. But I was thinking about it more, and I was like, okay, but why cats? And then also there's like the girls with their cat, and they're kind of acting out different behaviors too, like when they think the cat is pregnant, and then later they're like bathing the cat, and so they're kind of like acting like the cat is like a member of their group. And then so there's that element of it, but I think overall, like the cats, at least in my perspective, were like symbolic of innocence in a way. And it's like they're slowly it slowly erodes over time. Like at the beginning of the film, he sees that black cat that belongs to the girls, and he's like, don't shoot that one, it's a house cat, and they let it get away. But then at the end of the film, it has the kid walking up holding the cat that's dead. And so it kind of feels like over the course of the
You
film.
also see them standing there shooting it over and over again with a BB gun, like in the rain.
Exactly. Yeah. And so there's all
Mhm.
of these instances of like, and then there's like the scene that like literally almost made me throw up where like the cat was dangling, and they're like there's like it's awful to watch. And they're
Which one
like
is this? Is
eating
this the
this
one where
dead
they dunk
cat.
it?
Huh?
Is this the one where they like dunk it in the water? Or which
Yeah,
scene is that?
I think the cat had like already died, and they had like hung it up, and they were like whipping its body and stuff.
Yeah,
and
it's
and
terrible.
so it's
But
just like,
yeah.
and that's all near the end of the film. And so it's like you kind of see, at least how I was perceiving it was like it's he's like losing his innocence more and more, until it's almost completely gone, and he's like a part of this culture or whatever you want to call it. But he's basically become a victim of his circumstances, and given into that in order to survive in those circumstances. And it's like the whole film, it like approaches the characters with a very like matter of factness of what they're dealing with. And it is very funny at the same time too. Like I was laughing at the albino bit where she's like, I love Patrick Swayze, he's so hot. So like
Yeah.
there are those moments, but yeah, I feel like the overall theme is just, for me, what I drew from it was like that kind of idea of morphing into, whether you like it or not, like your environment, and how all of the people around them were pushing these narratives on them as well. And so I feel like it kind of like deconstructs innocence and turns it on its head, and it uses the framing of like this meandering hangout thing in order to kind of like move that. And so we see these kids, and they're like growing up really quickly, and at the end of it though, as much as they're pushed to be a certain way, like they're kind of just left to like wander around themselves, like there's no real end goal to anything that they're doing. but they're supposed to like be a certain way and like behave a certain way. And so I think it was just kind of interesting, like how much is imposed on them and how much is imposed. Like it just makes me think about like those circumstances in a variety of instances. But yeah, I think it's kind of, and it, I guess what I'm trying to say is like it's a reflection on the way that culture works and shapes us, and not always for the best. And in the way that it can often be extremely harmful. And I think that in this instance, in this film, it's very much focusing on that, and how it affects people, in many different circumstances. I don't know if that made sense. I was really rambling, but yeah, that's kind of what I drew from it.
No, I think it's a really good interpretation of the movie, especially for like a first time watch. Like, there's definitely some sort of symbolism going on with the cats. Like you said, with like a loss of innocence, I think it's a really good interpretation. And like, I think with like the girls, and they're like love their cat, and they're they're like washing it and treating it like a baby, and then like the juxtaposition of that against like just like extreme abuse of cats, I think is intentional. But one thing about like the culture, like affecting them, I thought it was interesting, like how it begins with like the tornado stuff. And they were talking about like Xenia, Ohio, and how there was this crazy tornado. And I feel like he kind of sets it up as like almost like a post-apocalyptic movie, or that's how he wants it to feel. Like I feel like you have that, and then I feel like he wants it to feel like this is like a post-apocalyptic environment, and I find that really interesting.
Yeah, it definitely feels like their environment is just like decaying around them. Like everything is dirty, everything is grimy, everything is rusted and falling apart. Like nothing, like it's like the town care forgot. Like everybody's just kind of given up in their own ways. And I thought that like a really good example of that is at the end in the bathtub. Like the water is disgusting. Like it's brown, black, you can't even see through it. And you
He
see
drops
him,
his chocolate bar in it.
yeah, he like has the chocolate in it, but then it's like you see him like spitting the water out and like playing in it and stuff. And I think that like that really epitomizes that idea of like he's literally bathing in like this environment, like he's consuming it, and it's like influencing him physically, emotionally, mentally, and he may not even realize it. He's just taking a bath and eating spaghetti, and his mom is shampooing his hair, and that whole thing was weird and gross. But then like even that, it's like how I don't know. It speaks again so much to roles, and it just I thought that was really interesting. But yeah, I think the idea of like post-apocalyptic, or just like growing up in a decayed world, or it just feels like their emotional landscapes are being reflected by their literal landscapes and vice versa. So yeah, I think that's a really good point as well. And I really liked that it had that kind of bookend of the tornado too. Like nothing is really stable at any moment. Everything could be just blown away, and you'll find an arm on the roof, and it's a little bit funny, but it's really dark. And yeah, so it just feels like that's a good point. It really kind of ties into yeah, being influenced by your environment and your culture, and how unstable and chaotic and violent it is.
Yeah. I mean, something I've heard Harmony Korine talk about, like how he was influenced by Cops, like the show Cops,
Oh, okay.
because Cops, if you really look back at the timeline of it, like Cops was like one of the first reality shows ever. And people look at it now as a, kind of a messed up show, because you're seeing these people who are like, in a bad place in their life, just be arrested and abused by cops in some cases. But it's interesting if you look at the context of when it came out. It was one of the first shows where you just saw somebody, and not even forget the cop element of it. You're seeing camera crews like go into houses of just random people and seeing how these like people live, like real people. Because at this point, you don't have YouTube, you don't see any of this stuff on TV, and cops like did that. And I think like one part that I really feel is influenced by that is when the kid, they show um, the two main kids like hanging out in this house where they're huffing glue, and there's this like little boy, and the little boy is like messing with pictures on the wall, and you see like just bugs like come like crawling out from under like the pictures, like crawling everywhere, and then he's like laying there with them, and like you see on his skin like bugs, and that was pretty disturbing. And I question like, I don't know if that's a real kid who's really in that environment, but it's pretty crazy stuff.
Yeah, it's very disturbing. And I think the whole thing about cops is an interesting tie-in as well because there is a lot of something I was thinking about a lot in this is the instances of violence. Like there's very obviously violence toward animals in this, and that's kind of a through line. But there's also a lot of violence toward other people, and I think that one of the most striking examples of that in the film is when the kids are at like the junk car lot or something, and they're playing like
Yeah.
cowboys. And so there's like the two cowboys, and then there's the kid dressed up as a bunny. And these kids are like, gosh, like elementary age. I don't know, like maybe 10, 12. They're like
Yeah,
very
they're just
young.
cursing, like,
Yeah, well,
insanely.
yeah, and they are, but even more than that, it's like they're yeah, they're using all different kinds of slurs and very violent language. But then they also like have guns, and they're like beating each other, and it's like, oh, I think he's dead, but let's shoot him more, and they like shoot him in the head. And you see it reenacted again with the cat at the end, just over the top. And I think it was a really interesting kind of moment to reflect on reactions to violence and reactions to seeing violence in your environment all the time. And like, so with cops, it very much praises the drama and the um like you said, it's people at their worst moments, and that's what it's focusing in on. And so if you're in an environment that's constantly showing you violence, that's what you act out, and that's what you like play. And so I think it was really unsettling because it's children, and it's like things that we see all the time happening in the adult world, and you almost don't even think anything of it. Like we see cowboy movies, whatever, westerns, and these things happen, and you're like, oh, that was a cool action scene. And then you see kids do it, and you're like, that was extremely upsetting. And it kind of forces you to look at the fact that the situation itself is upsetting, and the way that we're able to kind of justify it in certain circumstances and feel uncomfortable with it in others. And so I thought that was really interesting. And I think that discomfort is the point over and over again in the film. Like we shouldn't be okay with seeing these things, and yet they happen all the time and people don't care. Like there are I mean, you've said before that this is kind of like a culture, and it does still exist. Like there are these pockets of people who are kind of left behind and don't really have any like avenues to get out of where they are, and so they kind of succumb to it. And so it's just interesting to kind of like see how okay we can be with those scenes in some circumstances and be so not okay with them in others. um and yeah, it occurs over and over again in the film, these moments of just extreme like discomfort, like when the two boys go to like the pimp's house, and then you find out that like the girl is um probably
That's
on the
probably the scene that
spectrum.
I find the most uncomfortable. But I
Yeah,
mean, there's so many uncomfortable scenes in the movie, but that one
yeah,
specifically is the weirdest. But
yeah.
yeah.
Mhm. Oh yeah,
But
I
one,
mean
go ahead. Sorry.
no, I was kind of rambling there, but yeah, I think that's a good point as well. And it's just like you kind of reveal how wrong these things are, but he does it in a way that like pushes it to an extreme. But then you're like, okay, well, this is wrong regardless, but it's especially wrong here. Um,
Well, what I was gonna say, because I was talking about the beauty of that character, of the main character, and
mm,
specifically, I see it in that scene because you see the first guy go into the room with her. He just does whatever he does, but you go
mm,
into the next guy, the next kid, who I think, what is his name? One of their names is Tumblr. I think Tumblr is the other guy. But this kid goes in and he just like, treats her really nicely and is like smiling at her. And I feel like that's where you can see the beauty in that. Well, you can see the beauty in her, in somebody who, would unfortunately be cast aside in most societies. But and you see the beauty in him, I think. But yeah, like I said, you see it through this extreme darkness. And another thing I was gonna say
mm,
is that um like I'm from Texas, and I'm not like, I don't like to push like stereotypes of Texas, but like I feel like I've definitely been around people that are like this, and like it's just really not that far off. Like, there are people that are this messed up that exist now, and I think Harmony Korine, like he's almost like like Jacques Cousteau, like going under the water and filming fish, except he's filming this crazy like part of America, and it's a very American thing, I think. And I know I've heard him like saying like a commentary or something that he sees himself as a very American filmmaker. And everything that he does, he's sort of trying to like document or explore different avenues of America. But yeah, I find that interesting.
Yeah, and I think kind of what you're saying about like the glimmers of beauty, like for me, like those are the moments of innocence. Like maybe he doesn't even know, like he's a young kid. I mean, he's old enough, but like he's a pretty young kid. Like he may not even want to participate like with women that way at that point in his life, or know what to do, or maybe he just was really struck by the situation and didn't want to do anything at all. But I think it's that moment, yeah, it is like gentleness, but I think the whole point is like the characters that are so unfazed by their circumstances are the ones who are not really aware of what's happening, or aren't necessarily engaged in it. Like that girl in that scene, like, you know, to some extent, like she's maybe not completely, she doesn't have like the same autonomy of her situation and such, that like she's not subjected to it in the same way. Like it's still forced upon her, but like she's separated from it slightly. And so yeah, I think that was interesting. And then I think it does definitely capture a piece of America in terms of like certain people, but then also like a mindset and attitude and ways of behavior. And so yeah, I think he definitely captures that kind of American grit in a way. It's not pretty, but it's real. And it made me a little bit thankful that the film was only about 90 minutes, because I was like, man, if
Yeah.
it is a little bit taxing to watch at a certain point. Like it takes a lot of emotional energy to get through. Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of it has a more surreal slant, but somebody that could be compared now is like Sean Baker. I feel like what
Hmm.
he's doing is very similar. Like you look at like Red Rocket or the Florida Project. I feel like
Hmm.
he's going out after a similar thing. He's trying to show like underseen portions of like American society. He might not have. I feel like he's a little bit more straightforward in his approach. Not totally. There's still like an improvisational nature, but there's not like the extreme surrealism and absurdity of like a Harmony Korine movie. But another thing that I was thinking is that I feel like the main character, like the main kid, he's kind of the eyes of the audience. Like I feel like it's like a classic trope that's done in like many movies. I was just thinking about like Goodfellas and how like Henry Hill in that movie, like you'll have like Joe Pesci and he'll like, just like shoot the kid out of nowhere. He's like, "What are you doing?" And he's kind of like this innocent, like, you know. But the reason they're doing that is because he's the eyes of the audience. Like everything that we're seeing, because that's how we would react to that situation. That's what we're thinking. And I feel like that's what's happening here too, because he goes in and he treats her nicely because that's immediately the feeling that we have when we enter that room with her, with like the special needs girl in that room. I feel like he's representing what the audience is feeling, and like the same thing when he's like, "Don't shoot that house cat." Like, I feel like he's definitely the eyes of the audience, and I hadn't really thought of it that way before, but yeah,
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. I got that feeling too, but then it even opens with his kind of like whispered internal dialogue of like how he remembers things or how he sees things, or you know what's happening to him. And so I think it definitely puts you in the position of his character, in the way that you see it, and kind of move through the circumstances with him, and perceive different people. So I thought that was yeah, that's a really good observation. And I wonder too what you think about I don't know if they're necessarily like archival, if that would be the right way to describe it, but like it kind of shifts to like a VHS
yeah,
perspective a few times. Not really near the end, but like in the first half especially, it does this a few times where it shifts to this like super blurred out, like grainy, almost looking edited. And in fact, mentioning cops, like you see kind of like the blur on people's faces or their t-shirts, like marking out branding. And so you kind of see maybe a little bit of the aesthetic influence there from that show. But I thought that was really interesting too, because it kind of, for the way that I saw it, it was like normally you would think of home videos as being like very sentimental and cherished and really special. But in the instances where he uses it, it's in order to convey somebody's story of trauma. And you see like these figures where out of context you'd be like, oh, this is an interesting home movie if somebody's just sitting on their porch, you know, fiddling around. But with the voiceover of like what that person
Some
experienced,
horrible story.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a horrible story. And so I think it's again like this inversion of what you would expect from these things. And he's like, you may
Yeah.
expect a home movie to be so sentimental, but it's actually like extremely traumatic. And so I wonder like kind of what you felt with that, or if any of those segments stood out to you, because that really stuck with me.
Well, I know Harmony Korine has a huge thing for VHS, and like he made a whole movie like Trash Humpers that was all shot on VHS. But even in Spring Breakers, he uses some VHS footage, and even in The Beach Bum, I think there's like a couple of shots. But I think he's like using a lot of it, some of it, like the tornado stuff. I feel like some of it is definitely archival footage, like but then like I'm pretty sure they had crews like go around, like he would just give a bunch of people like VHS cameras, and then he
Mhm.
would be like, just go find people and talk to them, and that's how you get like scenes like there's that one scene where they're just like it's like a bunch of rednecks hanging out and just like throwing around racial slurs and saying terrible things, but
Mhm.
they managed to capture things that like you're surprised that these people would even say these things on camera, and those are the things. And I feel like he uses VHS because you associate VHS like you said with home movies. So whenever you're seeing this stuff, it feels ultra real, like just ultra real, and
Mhm.
you question how real it is, like with that story the girl is telling, and I feel like he wants to unsettle you, and like in how real it feels.
Mhm.
So yeah, and it might be real for all I know. Yeah,
It it very well could be. And the thing is, even if it's not real for that specific person, it's a real experience that a lot of people have had.
well, yeah, for sure.
um, and I think that he deserves a lot of praise for the way that that was approached, even because like as the girl is telling her story, like when it gets to the part where she's going into detail about what happened to her, the audio gets really kind of like distorted and there's like this overtone of it, so you don't really hear it. You can kind of like you can catch pieces, but I thought that like from the perspective of like obviously he doesn't pull punches with this movie, he shows a lot of grotesque and unsettling things. But I thought that in that specific instance, and then also in the instance of the two guys going to visit the girl, you know, who is being pimped, like he approaches it in a way that's sensitive to people who have had those experiences, where you don't have to like, it's enough that you get it without having to like see it, you know, or having to hear the whole thing. And the way he makes it kind of abstractive, I think I just think that he deserves a lot of credit for that, because I could see where some directors could take this and be like, well, I'm going to push the limits, I'm going to show what's real, and this is what's real, Gaspar Noé being one. And it's just like there's ways of doing it that's just as effective and drives your point home and slices to the core without having to rehash somebody's trauma all over again. So
Mhm.
I think that the way he made the film too is like, as much as he's kind of like, yeah, you know, Jacques Cousteau looking at the fish, he's also being very sensitive to his subjects. And like, there
That's what
are
you have to be if you're dealing with human beings. So yeah,
exactly. But I mean, not everybody is that way, and so I think that
yeah.
that's what sets him apart as being a really good filmmaker. And the fact that like there are those pieces that are people are just sitting around throwing around slurs, like the fact that it is so unfiltered makes it so uncomfortable, and so you still are getting this idea of like this is real, but like it's very much not okay.
Yeah.
So I thought that
Well, I think
was
all he's saying is just like, look at this. How does this make you feel? Like,
right,
it's not,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, I
So,
mean it's very like, yeah, matter of fact way of approaching it. And and doesn't filter it except for when it's appropriate to do so, and does it in a way that still is true to the circumstance. He like doesn't edit it out, but he makes it in a way that people are still going to be able to watch it. Um, and I think that's something that really makes the film engaging throughout too, is the music. Like this has some incredible needle drops, and I was so
Well,
surprised.
Crying with Roy Orbison is amazing.
Yeah, they were like, I really liked the way that he juxtaposed like the poppier stuff, like even like Crying, he references a couple times in the film, but then there's
Hmm.
like the metal cuts too, and I was like
Yeah,
so not
like
expecting
death metal. Yeah.
yeah, metal in this. Like there's the Slayer bit, which is like very kind of in your face, and he uses some of the footage from that, which is great. But then there's also like two sleep cuts. Like one sleep cut I'm in, two of them I was like, oh my god. So at the beginning too, that's something that really pulled me in. I think it was like the first 5 or 10 minutes they're like on their bikes, and he does Dragonaut by
Oh, I
Sleep.
love that.
Oh
Like,
my,
just I wasn't aware of that band at all. I don't know like who
yeah.
that is, but I've always loved that cut. Like, just like the on the bikes. It's like brum dum dum. Like, I love that.
It's so
But
good.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm a fan of Sleep. I actually saw them before, and I just, so when that came on, I was like, oh my gosh, this movie's crazy. And then later in the movie, he uses another Sleep cut, some grass, and I was like, oh hell yeah. And then he has like a Mystifier cut in there when they're breaking into the house, and so it's just like, I thought it was so cool that you get like, yeah, Roy Orbison, but then you also get like metal. And I was like, this is so for me.
yeah.
Which
And then they
yeah,
also have like Madonna,
yeah,
like a
exactly.
prayer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
how many films have that much range in their music? And I thought it was just like so well curated, and it flows so well through the film.
Mhm.
And yeah, so the
But if you
music.
think about the beginning of that Madonna song, it's
Uh-huh.
weird because there's like at the very beginning of that song, it kind of like I don't know how to like really put it into words, but there's just like kind of like an unsettling sound at the very beginning, and like I feel like it fits the tone of the entire movie, and then it goes into like a more poppy thing. But and with the metal, I feel like that like fits with the aggression and like some of the crazier stuff that's going on in this movie.
Mhm.
And then like the crying with Roy Orbison, like I feel like that's like sort of like a cathartic like expression of the soul, if that makes any sense. Like that's how they feel like on the inside. And even when like the one guy is like they're like laying there and huffing glue, and he's sort of just like repeating the lyrics to Crying. I feel like that's like just their pure human nature is being expressed for that song. I feel.
Yeah, and if I'm remembering right, that this song is actually played like when it's raining too, which is like its whole,
Yeah.
like it's again like the environment reflecting their like inner environment, where it's like they are feeling these things, and it's being reflected by like, you may not be able to cry because of the masculinity, the toxic, extremely toxic masculinity that's imposed upon you, but like this environment will cry for you, kind of. Like maybe I'm
Yeah.
reading into it a bit much there, but that's kind of
I
how it
think it's
felt.
really good and true. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many just little things about this film that work so well and are so interesting, and um all of the different characters too, like the adult characters. There's like the arm wrestling thing, and the guy loses the arm wrestling match, and so he feels like he needs to like prove his strength, and so he starts like tearing apart the table and chairs, and it becomes this whole thing. And it's just like, it's he's able to use somewhat candid footage and some scripted in order to really drive home this point. And I just think it's so well done. Like in every instance you get it. And it's just, yeah, it's such an incredible film. I'm so sad I never saw it before. But you know, it feels like maybe now is the right time for me, because I
Mhm.
feel like I gained a lot from it.
Oh, good. Yeah, I'm glad. Have you ever seen Days of Heaven,
I don't think so.
the Terrence Malick film?
No, I.
Um, yeah, I mean that was an influence on this. I mean, maybe like a little bit more, like not like totally directly, but there's a main girl in that. There's like a young girl, and you can see that being an influence too about how it's sort of through the eyes of this kid in this movie. But in that movie, it's through the eyes of a young girl, and I think she was a non-actor at the time. But it also stars Richard Gere. but mainly that girl is the main character. But that girl is in Gummo as the kid's mom as an adult. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I think the women in this film were really interesting too. The mom character for sure, with the whole tap dancing scene in the basement and that line like, "If you don't smile, I'm gonna kill you." You
Yeah.
really kind of get this a sense of his home environment, but then also like the pain that she's been through. Like you realize that like his father died at some point, and you know she really didn't really get over that, and is kind of like, I thought the whole thing of her putting on the tap shoes and performing and telling him like how to work out and not like she's, you see her trying to embody the father role and the mother role at the same time, and like how kind of comical and incongruent it is to like see her in these oversized tap shoes trying to do this routine, and not really connecting with her son in either way, like as a mother or as a father, except for kind of at the end she's like shampooing his hair and it's this maternal moment. But I thought that like those kind of moments were really interesting too, and he's able to convey like what his mom is going through without ever directly saying it. And so you see her struggle and trying to make it, and even with the bathtub scene trying to like be there with him and feed him and bathe him and all at the same time, and just like how much of a struggle it is to juggle these different things and these different roles, by yourself in a community and culture that isn't really built to support you. But at the same time there's the group of women who have like very much their own like kind of tribe. Like I love the scene of them sitting on the porch together, like painting nails. So,
Yeah.
and you see like the negative experiences that women have to deal with too. Like we referenced the kind of VHS bit, and that woman telling her story of trauma. But then later you see like the girls getting picked up and brought to some random parking lot, and the guy tries to like touch them, and then he's like, "Oh, it's nothing that, you know, should be new to you." And so you see,
Mhm.
and then at the same time like the younger girl being subjected to this, and she doesn't even really know what's
I like
happening.
how tough she is. Like she's like you idiot, like
Yeah,
just like
like they all
screaming at
beat
him.
on him and stuff, and so yeah, I think it's the way that he handles women's experiences, I feel is very well done too. He approaches it sensitively, but um not in a way that's disingenuous. Like he is as affecting and it's as grotesque, as what the men in the film face, but it just feels like very very genuine and capturing the experience in an equal way between the men and women, and what they experience. So yeah, I thought that like overall just I feel like he has a really good sensitivity for his subjects, which as you said you kind of need in that circumstance to make a movie like this. But even still, the fact that like this was in the 90s and he had the peace of mind to be like, I'm not peace of mind, he had the mind to be like, I'm going to approach this in these ways, I thought was very, it felt like very like kind of honoring of circumstances rather than taking advantage of circumstances of anybody in the film. um
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like one of the reasons why it's my favorite movie, or not my favorite movie, but one of my favorite movies, is that like I just feel like there's nothing else like it out there, and like I respond to
Mhm.
that um when there's something that's just like truly unique, and I know that like Harmony Korine has said like one of his main objectives when making a movie is to find something that he wants to see that has on film, but that has never been seen in the film before, and
Mhm.
he tries to do that. But and to bring it back to Werner Herzog, I feel like there's moments of extreme absurdity in his films,
Mhm.
and if you take those moments, like stuff in Strozek, where they're using real actors, like real cops, who are just sort of like stilted non-actors, but then you have like this strong like a moment of like the car spinning around, and him like robbing a bank with a turkey or whatever. And like I feel like if you take that and you stretch it out to a whole movie and then inject it with some other stuff, you basically have like what Harmony Korine does. And I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, the sense of humor I can definitely see where it's just like it's so human and it feels so like, yeah, that's about right. But it's so absurd. Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to think of like some other funny moments um in the film, but or in Gummo, but yeah, I just keep thinking about like the albino lady because that bit was so, it felt like kind of like a breath. Like he was like, okay, now here's this little bit to kind of like bring it back around before I dunk you back into the sludge. But yeah, I mean, like she had her own problems, but it was so funny. Yeah, I think that's a great tie-in. And the next time I watch it, I'll definitely be thinking about Herzog and kind of looking for more of that.
Yeah, I definitely recommend his films that have Herzog in them, like Mr. Lonely. He has a
Yeah.
great part as a priest in Mr. Lonely. I think Mr. Lonely is like his most accessible, maybe. Well, that and Spring Breakers. It's interesting because he's only made like 6 movies, but he sort of dips like in and out of like pure abstractness. Like Gummo is pretty abstract, but it's shot on film. It feels like a movie. But right after that, he makes Julian Donkey Boy, which is all like really grainy mini DV camera, and it's still a good movie. But I don't like it as much as Gummo. But it seems more idiosyncratic and like not as accessible. But then like he makes Mr. Lonely, which I feel like is, you know, could be like an art film compared to anything by like Lars von Trier or whoever. It's a very well made, like shot on film movie, and it feels like a movie 100%. But then right after that, he makes Trash Hunters, shot on VHS, just 90 minutes of insanity. Um, but then he goes and he makes Spring Breakers, which is like his first movie that like played wide in theaters everywhere, and really, I think um, people didn't know what to think about it when that happened. But yeah, I find it interesting that he goes back and forth between making things that are like accessible, quote unquote, for him. They're still not that accessible, but between that and just things that are like totally not accessible at all, like Trash Humpers or Julian Donkey Boy.
Mm. Well, I need to watch through more of his catalog because I feel like it's something that I could find a lot in. I mean, like I said at the start of this conversation, like I really liked Spring Breakers, and it even grew on me after the initial watch, and I liked it even more, which I could definitely see happening with Gummo too. And so it just makes me want to dive in and experience the rest of his films, especially if there aren't many, and if they have
Mhm.
this same kind of like
There's not many, and they're all very short. Like they're all under 90 minutes.
we love to see it. That's awesome.
Yeah,
Makes it easier on me for sure. Maybe this will be my Harmony year. We'll see.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm really glad you recommended this. It had been sitting on my watch list for a long time. And I think it's one of those where like it had such a reputation that I was nervous to like watch it. Like, oh, is this going to be the right time? And it's one of those you just have to kind of pop it on and just watch it at a certain point because maybe it'll never be the
Yep.
right time.
I wasn't sure if I should recommend it because there is so much crazy stuff that happens in it. But the only reason I thought that maybe it would be okay is because I saw that you had seen Happiness,
Yeah.
directed by Todd Solondz. So I thought if you like that movie, you might appreciate this.
Yeah, I mean, my taste has definitely changed and matured over the years where I'm more sensitive to certain things, but at the same time, like it doesn't necessarily detract from a film. I'm just more aware of it, and sometimes I think that that awareness can make me perceive a film in a different way than maybe some other people, and so that can make me feel a little bit disconnected from the opinion at large. But it's, yeah, it's not to say that I can't like tolerate it or understand it or appreciate it in its context. And so I think that something like this, yeah, again he's really using the subjects to make a larger point, and is still doing it in a sensitive way, even though it is like very harsh and abrasive. And so I have a lot of respect for that, and I think that that is more of the approach that we should see, or that I would like to see, which is not avoiding topics but approaching them in a way that is actually trying to say something and make progress toward greater understanding. So I appreciate you taking that into consideration. But yeah, I think it just creates more discussion, which is needed.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think things like this should still be seen, and
Yeah,
especially like it's interesting to look at a time where people were pretty like unfiltered. I mean, there was still like political correctness, and not to go into a whole thing about that, but like there's just like a lot of things about like like in the 90s and the 70s. Like, there's some crazy stuff out there that will never get made now, which doesn't like, I'm not like complaining about that. I'm glad that stuff exists. But yeah, I just think it's interesting.
Yeah, definitely times have changed a lot, but again, I think that speaks to what a good filmmaker he is. Like even in the sense of like how he treats like the queer community in this. Like obviously there's a lot of slurs and a lot of aggression and hostility toward that group by people in the film. There's also like moments of beauty of it. Like there's the bit where he's like the guy's brother is shown like with lipstick and posing, and it's like they're very like lovely images, and you see this person as like being themselves, and you understand that like how it would be perceived by the characters, but like it actually provides a really nice contrast where it's like these people are saying all of these things, but if you actually look at it, it can be, or it is very beautiful. And so yeah,
Well, I think anytime anybody's throwing out like slurs like that, these people are like obviously horrible people. It's very obvious,
they're
and
obviously
like
wrong.
anybody, yeah, and then with the characters, like you mentioned, the kid who wears like women's clothes and whatnot, and then there's the scene where Harmony Korine himself had a little cameo, and he's like on the couch with like the with a dwarf, and he's saying like he says like I'm gay, and then like he like tries to kiss him and stuff, and he's like you're not gay, but like I feel like what I'm trying to say is that with these gay characters, I feel like you feel empathy for them and you feel for them because I've showed that to people, and whenever he tries to make a move and he's rejected, people are like oh, I'm like feel bad for him. So I feel like his those characters I feel like he shows with empathy, and like the characters that are just hurling slurs are just painted as just like just grotesque figures.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that whole scene with the two guys on the sofa, I thought was really affecting too. I thought that was great. Like the only time this guy's really probably been able to like talk about his experiences and his feelings are like when he's very drunk and like kind of exposing himself to this other person, and then tries to find what he's missing, like this affection and acceptance from this person, just because he assumes a certain thing, about what their sexuality means. So yeah, I thought that was like a really good and affecting scene too. And yeah, it just ties back into what I was saying. Like even with these like small kind of like satellite characters that you just see pop in and out or like kind of drift around, it's still like very powerful, and he's trying to say something even with those small moments.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think it's a great movie, and I'm glad that you
really
watched
good.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah, I would give it a 5.
me
What
too.
would you give it? And I'm
Yeah,
glad.
oh,
Yeah,
right there
that's
with you.
awesome.
I think this is definitely a 5.
Yeah, that's
Good
awesome. But
stuff.
yeah, I think that's about all I have to say about this movie. But yeah, thanks
Yeah.
again for being here.
Yeah, for sure. Great chat. Looking forward to the next one.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.